Real clients do not wait in the lobby, Richard Caldwell said as he passed the glass reception wall without slowing down. Tell her to keep waiting. Naomi Whitaker heard every word from the charcoal gray sofa beneath the company logo, but she did not lift her voice, did not follow him, did not give the polished lobby the anger it seemed to be waiting for. She only looked at the slim gold watch on her wrist and noted the time, 2 hours and 47 minutes since she had checked in at Caldwell Meridian Systems for a meeting that had been confirmed twice by email, and once by the board office. The lobby smelled faintly of espresso, floor polish, and cold air conditioning. Sunlight poured through the 30-foot windows, bright enough to make the marble floor glow, but not warm enough to soften the room. Naomi sat with a leather portfolio beside her, a charcoal blazer over a cream blouse, dark trousers pressed clean, phone face up on her knee, and the final signature page of a $500 million infrastructure and logistics technology contract resting in the folder like a quiet engine no one downstairs had bothered to recognize. Behind the reception desk, Emily Hart froze with her tablet in both hands, her face tight with discomfort. She was 28, new enough to still feel shame when power acted ugly, but experienced enough to know Richard Caldwell liked obedience more than correction. Ms. Whitaker, Emily said carefully. I am sorry. Mr. Caldwell is still delayed. Naomi looked up at her, calm, precise, the kind of calm that made excuses sound smaller. Please document that I arrived at 1 o'clock for a 1:15 meeting, that I was checked in by security, that the meeting was delayed without explanation, and that the delay was extended by the chief executive officer at 3:47. Emily's fingers hesitated over the tablet. I can note your arrival time. Note all of it, Naomi said. I do not need special treatment. I need the record to be accurate. At the lobby entrance, Samuel Price, the black security officer who had greeted her with respect when she arrived, glanced toward the executive elevators. He was 58, broad-shouldered, gray at the temples, a man who had spent years watching buildings reveal their values by how they treated people who waited. He had logged Naomi in himself, handed her a visitor badge, offered water, and quietly noticed that every executive who passed her after the first hour looked through her as if patience meant insignificance. The ice in her glass had melted to a thin ring of water on the side table. Her visitor badge had bent slightly at one corner from being clipped, removed, and clipped again. Upstairs, behind frosted glass and polished doors, people were waiting for her signature without knowing they had left the signer below them. Richard Caldwell stepped back out from the private elevator bank with 2 executives beside him, white, 52, silver tie, expensive watch, his confidence smooth enough to hide contempt from people who wanted to keep their jobs. His eyes passed over Naomi's blazer, her portfolio, her quiet posture, and stopped on Emily. Still here? He asked. Emily's voice lowered. Yes, sir. Richard gave a short, amused breath. If she were important, someone would have called me. Naomi stood then, not quickly, not dramatically. The lobby changed around the movement. Samuel straightened. Emily stopped typing. One of the executives glanced at the leather portfolio as if seeing it for the first time. Naomi picked up her phone and opened the calendar invitation showing Richard Caldwell, Victor Lane, Helen Whitfield, Legal Review, Strategic Client Signing, 1:15 in the executive boardroom. She turned the screen toward Emily, not Richard. Please attach this to the meeting log. Richard frowned. And who exactly are you supposed to be? Naomi looked at him with 3 hours of stillness behind her eyes. The person your company asked to be here on time. The air conditioner hummed overhead. Outside the glass doors, afternoon traffic moved along the avenue. Inside the lobby, the marble, the badge, the melted ice, and the unsigned page all seemed to wait with her. Richard smiled without warmth. Then wait like everyone else. Naomi closed the portfolio softly, the sound small but final enough for Samuel to hear from across the room. No, she said. Everyone else is not holding your largest contract. Naomi Whitaker had built her life around rooms that underestimated quiet women. She had learned early that some people only respected noise because noise reminded them of their own power. She preferred records, signatures, due diligence, and results that could not be dismissed once the numbers reached the table. At 39, she was the founder and managing partner of Whitaker Harbor Capital, a private investment firm that financed logistics corridors, port upgrades, warehouse automation, and infrastructure technology across the country. She had begun with a rented office over a dry cleaner in Atlanta, 2 analysts, 1 old printer, and a refusal to let anyone call her ambition unrealistic. Now her fund controlled assets that moved freight through ports, rail yards, distribution centers, and highway networks from Virginia to California. The $500 million contract inside her leather portfolio was not a favor to Caldwell Meridian Systems. It was an opportunity they had chased for 8 months, an opportunity their board had celebrated before anyone in the lobby bothered to read the name on her visitor badge. Naomi did not arrive with a motorcade or a ring of assistants. She did not bring a public relations team, a lawyer at each shoulder, or a voice sharpened for intimidation. She came alone because the final meeting was supposed to be simple: review the board packet, sign the strategic client agreement, confirm implementation milestones, and leave before evening traffic made the avenue impossible. Her charcoal blazer was tailored but not loud. Her cream blouse was plain. Her dark trousers were professional. Her shoes were polished from the walk between the parking garage and the lobby. Everything about her said prepared, not desperate. Yet Richard Caldwell had seen a black woman waiting alone and decided waiting was where she belonged. The words he had thrown across the lobby still hung in the air when Naomi closed her portfolio. Emily Hart stood behind the reception desk with the calendar invitation on her tablet, her face losing color as she finally saw the meeting title clearly: Whitaker Harbor Capital Strategic Client Signing, Executive Boardroom, 115. Samuel Price remained near the security podium, quiet but alert, the arrival log open in front of him. "Ms. Whitaker," Emily said, her voice low, "I did not realize the contract was connected to your firm." Naomi looked at her without cruelty. "You were not supposed to guess. You were supposed to check." Emily swallowed. Richard's expression tightened, but he recovered quickly, the way powerful men often do when truth arrives before they are ready to greet it. "There must be some confusion," he said. "Our major client representative was expected upstairs." Naomi turned her phone so the screen faced him now. The email chain showed his assistant, the board chair, the chief financial officer, and legal counsel. Her name appeared on every confirmation. "I was expected upstairs," she said. One of the executives beside Richard glanced at the message and took half a step back, as if distance could protect him from the mistake. Richard gave a thin smile. "Well, if there was a scheduling issue, we can still accommodate you." Naomi looked toward the executive elevators, then at the glass doors reflecting her own stillness back at her. "Accommodate me after making me wait 3 hours? We are a busy organization. So is mine." The lobby went silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioning and the faint click of Samuel's pen near the logbook. Naomi picked up the visitor badge from the side table. Its corner had bent after hours of being handled, clipped, and ignored. She held it between 2 fingers. "Please make sure the record shows I arrived on time, remained available, and was delayed by your office while your board waited for a signature you already had downstairs." Richard's jaw shifted. "You should have identified yourself more clearly." Naomi's eyes stayed steady. "My name was on the invite. My name was on the badge. My name is on the contract. How many times does a black woman have to identify herself before the room decides to read?" Emily lowered her eyes. Samuel looked down at the log, but not before Naomi saw the quiet respect in his face. Richard said nothing for one full breath. Above them, somewhere beyond the glass and steel, a boardroom still had an empty chair reserved for the person standing in the lobby with the unsigned page in her hand. Richard Caldwell had spent 20 years learning how to make glass, height, and silence feel like authority. His office sat on the 42nd floor of Caldwell Meridian Systems, above a boardroom with a wall of windows, a private elevator, and a conference table long enough to make visitors feel measured before they sat down. People rose when he entered. Assistants adjusted calendars before he asked. Executives laughed at half-formed jokes because his approval moved budgets, promotions, and stock confidence. Over time, the company had trained itself to interpret his preferences as strategy. If Richard ignored a visitor, the visitor became unimportant. If he delayed a meeting, the delay became necessary. If he looked at someone and saw inconvenience, the building found a way to make that person wait. Naomi Whittaker had become the latest target of that quiet machinery because she did not arrive in the costume Richard expected wealth to wear. No entourage. No luxury watch flashed across the reception desk. No impatient demand for a private elevator. She had sat calmly in the lobby with a leather portfolio and a visitor badge, and Richard had mistaken her restraint for lack of power. Now the mistake stood in front of him with the calendar invitation glowing on her phone and the $500 million signature page resting in her folder. Still, pride searched for another explanation. "Emily," Richard said, keeping his voice controlled. "Why was I not told Ms. Whittaker had arrived?" Emily Hart looked down at the tablet in her hands. Her thumb hovered over the meeting log, where Naomi's arrival time, security check-in, and repeated status updates were visible in clean black text. "You were notified at 1:06, 2:05, and 3:18, she said carefully. "You told me to keep her in the lobby." The executive beside Richard shifted his weight. Samuel Price, at the security podium, lowered his pen and looked toward the arrival log without speaking. Naomi watched all of it from the center of the lobby, her face composed, her posture straight, her anger disciplined enough to become evidence instead of noise. Richard's eyes narrowed, not at the facts, but at the people allowing them to remain facts. "I had a full schedule." Naomi looked at the melted ice water on the side table, the bent visitor badge, the marble floor shining under lights that had treated her like decoration for nearly 3 hours. "So did I." Richard inhaled through his nose, then looked toward the elevators as if the boardroom upstairs could still rescue him. "We can move this conversation upstairs." Naomi did not move. "The conversation started here when you decided I was not worth bringing upstairs." Emily's face tightened. Samuel's jaw flexed once, the smallest sign of respect held under professional stillness. Richard lowered his voice. "Ms. Whittaker, this is not the tone I expected from a strategic partner." Naomi picked up the leather portfolio and held it against her side. "And this is not the leadership my board expected from yours." For the first time, the lobby did not belong to him. The glass walls reflected Richard's expensive suit, the executives behind him, Emily frozen at reception, Samuel standing beside the log, and Naomi in the middle of all of it, quiet as a signed verdict waiting to happen. Then Richard's phone buzzed. He glanced down, and the name on the screen drained the color from his expression: Victor Lane, Chief Financial Officer. Upstairs, the empty chair had finally become impossible to ignore. Richard Caldwell let the phone buzz twice before answering, because pride still wanted one more second to look calm. "Victor," he said, turning slightly away from Naomi Whittaker as if the conversation could be pulled back into his control by angle alone. But the lobby had already changed. Emily Hart stood behind reception with the meeting log open. Samuel Price remained beside the security podium, where Naomi's arrival times sat in black ink under the company name. 2 executives hovered near the elevator bank, no longer smiling, no longer certain who held the room. Naomi did not step closer. She did not need to. She stood beneath the Caldwell Meridian Systems logo with her leather portfolio at her side, the bent visitor badge in her hand, and nearly 3 hours of documented waiting behind her. Richard listened to Victor Lane on the phone, and the color moved out of his face in slow degrees. "What do you mean the signature page is missing?" he asked, too quietly for confidence, and too loudly for privacy. Upstairs, Victor's voice carried through the speaker for half a second before Richard lowered the volume. "Helen is asking where Ms. Whittaker is. Legal says the board packet cannot close without her authorization." Richard turned his back farther, but Naomi saw Emily's eyes widen. She saw Samuel look down, not to hide anything, but because he understood what humiliation looked like when it started reversing direction. Richard cleared his throat. There appears to have been a scheduling mix-up. Naomi's gaze moved to the marble floor where the sunlight had shifted since her first hour of waiting. There was no mix-up, she said. Richard covered the phone with his palm. Ms. Whitaker, I am on a call. And I am still on the record. Emily's fingers moved before Richard could stop her, adding the statement to the log. He noticed, and his jaw tightened. Emily, that is enough. Naomi turned toward the young assistant, not commanding, not pleading. Please also attach the email chain showing the 1:15 boardroom meeting, the strategic client signing, and the repeated arrival notices sent to Mr. Caldwell's office. Emily swallowed, then nodded once. Richard's voice hardened. You are making this unnecessarily difficult. Naomi looked at him with the kind of stillness that had survived louder rooms than this one. No. I am making it accurate. The private elevator opened behind Richard, and Victor Lane stepped out faster than any chief financial officer liked to be seen moving. He was white, 49, silver glasses, navy suit, a contract packet under one arm, and fear dressed as urgency in his face. He stopped when he saw Naomi. Recognition hit him before protocol did. Ms. Whitaker, he said, breath short. I apologize. We were told you had not arrived. Naomi looked at Richard. I arrived at 1 o'clock. Victor turned to Emily. Is that confirmed? Emily's voice trembled but held. Yes. Security checked her in at 1:02. I notified Mr. Caldwell's office 3 times. Samuel stepped forward just enough to place the visitor log on the reception counter. I also recorded her arrival and offered water after the first delay. Victor stared at the log, then at the melted ice water on the side table, then at the visitor badge in Naomi's hand. The lobby no longer felt like a waiting area. It felt like a ledger. Every object had become an entry. Richard tried to recover with a corporate smile. Victor, let us not dramatize a delay. Ms. Whitaker and I were about to go upstairs. Naomi opened her leather portfolio slowly and removed the final signature page, clean, and signed, and heavy with consequence. No, she said. I was about to leave. Victor's eyes dropped to the page. Richard's smile failed. Emily stopped typing. Samuel stood perfectly still. Naomi held the paper not like a threat, but like a mirror. Before I do, she said, I want the record to show that your largest client was left in the lobby for 3 hours after arriving on time, while your chief executive officer walked past her and decided she could wait. Victor closed his eyes for one brief second, as if calculating not only money but damage. Richard looked toward the elevator, toward the executives, toward anything except the woman he had misjudged. Naomi placed the unsigned page back into the portfolio. The soft sound of leather closing moved through the lobby like a door deciding not to open. Naomi Whitaker did not leave immediately, and that restraint frightened Victor Lane more than anger would have. Anger could be managed with apologies, statements, and polished conference room language. Restraint meant she was thinking like the managing partner of Whitaker Harbor Capital, weighing risk, leadership reliability, governance culture, and whether $500 million should ever be placed in the hands of a company whose chief executive officer could not recognize its largest client when she was sitting 10 feet from his own lobby desk. Richard Caldwell stood near the elevator bank with his phone still in his hand, his silver tie straight, his expensive watch catching the lobby light, but the room no longer bent toward him. Emily Hart had the meeting log open. Samuel Price had the security arrival record ready. Victor held the contract packet against his chest like paper could steady his breathing. Naomi looked at the glass doors, where afternoon light had begun to fade into the hard reflection of the lobby behind her. The ice in her water was gone. The glass held only a thin ring of moisture at the bottom. 3 hours had turned cold hospitality into evidence. Ms. Whitaker, Victor said carefully, we can have the board assembled downstairs within minutes. Chairwoman Whitfield is already asking for you. Richard stepped in quickly. There is no need to escalate this. We can go upstairs, sign, and move forward. Naomi turned to him. You still think the goal is to get my signature before the record catches up? Richard's face tightened. The goal is partnership. Partnership started at 1:15. Emily's fingers paused, then moved again across the tablet. Richard saw it and spoke through his teeth. Emily. Victor looked at him sharply. Let her document it. The words surprised everyone, including Emily. Samuel's posture remained professional, but his eyes lifted for one brief second toward Naomi, as if acknowledging that the room had finally begun telling the truth in its own language. Naomi set the portfolio on the reception counter and opened it, not to sign, but to remove the board correspondence showing approval milestones, implementation phases, penalty clauses, and leadership conduct language buried in a section most executives skimmed until it mattered. She placed the page on the counter and tapped one line with her finger. Client confidence review, she said. Leadership conduct and execution risk. Victor leaned closer, and his expression changed from embarrassment to alarm. Richard glanced at the page and gave a dismissive breath. That is standard language. Naomi looked at him. It becomes specific when your behavior makes it relevant. The lobby doors opened, and a group of junior staff stepped in from lunch, slowing when they felt the tension. Naomi did not perform for them. She closed the portfolio halfway and picked up the bent visitor badge. Its plastic edge had creased where it had rubbed against her blazer through hours of being treated as less than the meetings she was carrying. Your assistant notified you 3 times. Security logged my arrival. Your chief financial officer needed my signature. Your board expected me upstairs. You did not delay the contract because information was missing. You delayed it because you decided I did not look like the person worth reading about. No one corrected her. No one could. Richard stared at the marble floor for a second, then forced his eyes back to hers. I apologize if you felt disrespected. Naomi's expression did not change. Do not apologize for what I felt. Apologize for what you did. Victor lowered his gaze. Emily stopped typing. Samuel looked toward the lobby doors, giving the moment privacy without leaving it. Richard's mouth opened, then closed. The apology he had prepared was too small for the truth in front of him. Naomi slipped the unsigned page back into the portfolio and fastened the clasp. I am pausing the agreement pending leadership review. Victor's shoulders dropped as if the sentence had physical weight. Richard finally understood that the signature had not been delayed by her patience. It had been removed by his own judgment. Naomi picked up her phone, scrolled to Maya Brooks, General Counsel, and pressed call. When the line connected, her voice stayed calm. Maya, send the formal pause notice to Caldwell Meridian. Include arrival logs, meeting delay records, and executive conduct concerns. She listened for a moment, then looked at Richard. Yes, she said into the phone. All communication goes through counsel now. The lobby was silent except for the hum of the lights, and the small sound of Emily saving the record before anyone could soften it. Naomi Whitaker ended the call with Maya Brooks and lowered the phone without lowering the standard she had just set. The lobby of Caldwell Meridian Systems seemed to hold itself still around her, every polished surface suddenly too bright, every quiet machine too loud. The air conditioning whispered from the vents above the 30-foot windows. The marble floor reflected Richard Caldwell's silver tie, Victor Lane's pale worry, Emily Hart's hands paused over the tablet, Samuel Price standing near the security podium, and Naomi at the reception counter with the leather portfolio closed under her palm. The melted ice water on the side table had warmed to room temperature. The visitor badge in her hand had a folded corner that would never lie flat again. Those small things mattered because they told the story exactly as it had happened. A woman arrived on time, waited with patience, asked for accuracy, and was treated like an inconvenience until money made people learn her name. Victor looked at the contract packet, then toward the private elevator. Chairwoman Whitfield is coming down, he said quietly. Richard turned on him. That is unnecessary. Victor did not step back. The agreement is paused. The board chair needs to hear why from the client, not from us after we damage it further. The sentence landed in the lobby with more courage than Victor seemed to expect from himself. Emily saved another entry in the meeting log. Naomi noticed the small act and the way Emily's shoulders trembled after it, not from fear alone, but from finally doing the thing she should have done earlier. Samuel stepped closer, his voice respectful and low. "Ma'am, I can provide the security arrival log directly to your counsel if needed." Naomi turned to him, and the hardness around her eyes softened for the first time that afternoon. "Thank you, Mr. Price. You were the only person in this building who treated me like I belonged here before you knew what I controlled." Samuel nodded once, but his throat moved with feeling. "Respect should not require a contract." Naomi held his gaze. "No, it should not." Richard looked away from them, perhaps because the exchange made the truth too plain. The private elevator chimed, and Helen Whitfield stepped into the lobby, white, 63, composed in a navy suit, silver hair cut sharp at her jawline, a bored chair who understood crisis not by volume but by what the quiet people stopped saying. She looked first at Naomi, then at the portfolio, then at the visitor badge, then at Richard. "Ms. Whitaker," Helen said, "I owe you an apology on behalf of this board." Naomi did not move toward her. "The board may owe me a review. The apology belongs to the person who made the decision." Helen accepted the correction with a small nod and turned to Richard. "Then make it." Richard's jaw worked once. His eyes moved across the lobby as if searching for a version of the apology that did not place blame where it belonged. He found none. "Ms. Whitaker," he said, voice controlled but thin, "I apologize for making you wait and for not confirming your identity earlier." Naomi waited. The silence did not rescue him. Helen's face hardened. Emily looked down at the log. Samuel stood still. Victor closed his eyes briefly. Richard understood, finally, that apology without truth was only another delay. "I judged you before I read the record," he said. "I treated you as if you were not important enough to bring upstairs. That was wrong." Naomi listened, not satisfied, not cruel, simply present. "Preserve the lobby logs, calendar records, security entry time, visitor badge data, email chain, and all internal messages related to today's delay," she said. Helen answered immediately. "Done." Naomi lifted the portfolio from the counter. "My counsel will send the pause notice. Any future conversation about this agreement goes through her until Whitaker Harbor Capital completes leadership review." Victor nodded because there was nothing else to do. Richard stood beneath his own company logo, smaller than it had ever made him look. Naomi turned toward the glass doors, and Samuel moved ahead to open them. The late afternoon light touched the leather portfolio as she walked, calm and unhurried, leaving behind a lobby that had spent 3 hours teaching her exactly what kind of leadership lived upstairs. Samuel Price opened the glass lobby doors before Naomi Whitaker reached them, and for one brief second the air outside felt warmer than the building that had kept her waiting. Afternoon traffic moved along the avenue in bright, restless lines. The company logo reflected behind her in the glass, tall and polished, while Richard Caldwell stood beneath it with the stillness of a man finally understanding that an apology could not sign a contract for him. Naomi paused at the threshold, not because she doubted her decision, but because she wanted the moment to remain clear in everyone's memory. Victor Lane had already opened his phone to notify legal and finance. Emily Hart was saving the meeting log with every timestamp intact. Helen Whitfield stood beside the reception counter, her eyes fixed on Richard with the kind of boardroom silence that promised consequences. "Ms. Whitaker," Helen said, "we will cooperate fully with your counsel." Naomi turned back. The leather portfolio rested against her side, the unsigned signature page inside it, untouched. "Cooperation is not the same as correction," she said. "Correction begins with the next person who walks into this lobby without looking like what someone expected." No one answered quickly. The lobby had become honest in a way it had avoided for 3 hours. Richard's mouth tightened, but he did not interrupt. Emily looked up from the tablet. Samuel kept one hand on the door, steady and respectful. Naomi's gaze moved to him. Please make sure your own statement is preserved too, Mr. Price. The arrival log matters, but so does who treated the client with basic respect before the money was mentioned. Samuel's eyes softened. Yes, ma'am. Richard shifted then, the old reflex of control trying to return. Naomi, if we could schedule a private conversation, I believe we can repair this. She looked at him without anger, which made the answer colder than rage would have been. You are not ready to repair what you still want to manage. Victor looked down. Helen did not protect Richard from the sentence. Naomi continued, voice level enough for the body of the lobby to hear. My fund evaluates risk before investment. Today showed leadership risk, culture risk, execution risk, and reputational risk. That is what my counsel will review. Richard's face lost another shade of certainty. He had expected a client offended by inconvenience. He was now facing an investor documenting governance failure. Emily typed the words carefully. Helen turned to her. Send a preservation notice to Information Technology, Legal, Security, and Executive Administration. Nothing from today is to be deleted or altered. Yes, Chairwoman Whitfield, Emily said, and this time her voice did not shake. Samuel stepped slightly aside as Naomi moved through the doorway. Outside, the noise of the city returned, a bus braking at the corner, a horn far down the block, the low rush of air between high buildings. Naomi inhaled once and felt the tightness in her chest begin to loosen, not because justice was complete, but because she had refused to let disrespect decide the terms of her power. Behind her, through the glass, Richard remained near the logo, no longer framed as a leader but as a man standing inside the record he created. Victor spoke urgently into his phone. Helen crossed the lobby toward the elevators, carrying the weight of a board that now had to answer for what its chief executive officer had shown in public. Samuel gave Naomi a small nod before letting the door close softly between them. She looked down at the visitor badge still in her hand, bent at the corner, then placed it carefully into the outer pocket of the portfolio. Not as a souvenir. As evidence. Then she walked toward the black sedan waiting at the curb, calm, unhurried, leaving the company with its glass tower, its empty client chair, and the silence of $500 million no longer guaranteed. The black sedan waited at the curb with its rear door open, but Naomi Whittaker did not get in right away. She stood beside the vehicle for a moment with the leather portfolio against her side, the bent visitor badge tucked into its outer pocket, and the afternoon light sliding down the glass face of Caldwell Meridian Systems behind her. The building looked unchanged from the street, polished, expensive, confident, full of windows that reflected the city without revealing the people inside. But Naomi knew the temperature upstairs had shifted. In the 42nd floor boardroom, the long conference table was still arranged for a signing that would not happen that day. The chair reserved for the strategic client sat empty at the center of one side, a pitcher of water untouched beside a clean glass, a printed nameplate waiting for a person the company had left below. The $500 million contract packet lay open under bright overhead lights, missing only the signature Richard Caldwell had assumed would arrive no matter how he treated the woman carrying it. Helen Whitfield entered the boardroom first, followed by Victor Lane and two silent executives who no longer looked eager to be near Richard. He came in last, slower than before, his silver tie still straight, his expression controlled in the brittle way control looks when it has stopped working. Helen stood at the head of the table and did not sit. The agreement is paused pending leadership review, she said. Legal will issue a preservation hold immediately. All lobby footage, badge data, calendar entries, emails, internal messages, security logs, and assistant notes from today are to be retained. One executive shifted uncomfortably. Victor placed the contract packet on the table. Maya Brooks, counsel for Whittaker Harbor Capital, has already requested all future communication go through her office. Richard looked at the empty client chair as if it had become louder than any person in the room. This is being overblown, he said, but the sentence did not find support. Helen turned to him. No, Richard. It was ignored until the client made it expensive to ignore. Downstairs, Naomi looked through the lobby glass and saw Samuel Price standing near the security podium, entering something carefully into the log. He looked up once and gave her a respectful nod through the reflection. She returned it. He had done a small thing that should not have felt rare. He had treated her as a person before anyone understood her financial value. Emily Hart appeared behind him, speaking with someone from legal, her tablet held close, no longer hiding discomfort behind obedience. Naomi hoped the young woman would remember that courage did not always arrive as a grand speech. Sometimes it arrived as an accurate timestamp. Her phone vibrated in her hand. Maya's name lit the screen. Naomi answered. I am outside. Maya's voice came through calm, professional, protective. The pause notice has been sent. I included the leadership conduct clause, the arrival timeline, the repeated delay record, and the request for preservation. Naomi closed her eyes for half a breath. The city moved around her, tires over asphalt, a bus exhaling at the stop, footsteps on concrete, wind brushing against the building's flags. Good, she said. Do not let them reduce this to a scheduling issue. I will not. Naomi opened her eyes and looked up at the tower. And make sure Samuel Price's statement is included if he is willing. He saw the whole thing. Already noted. Behind the glass, Richard was no longer visible from the lobby. He was upstairs with the contract he could not close and the chair he had kept empty by choice. Naomi finally slid into the sedan and placed the portfolio across her lap. The driver waited for her signal. She looked once more at the building, not with bitterness, but with the clean distance of someone who had learned what she needed to know. Send them the formal review terms, she told Maya. And make it clear that respect is not a courtesy item. It is a leadership requirement. Then she ended the call, rested her hand on the closed portfolio, and let the car door shut with a quiet final sound. The sedan pulled away from the curb without hurry, leaving Caldwell Meridian Systems behind in a sheet of glass and reflected evening light. Naomi Whitaker sat in the back seat with the leather portfolio resting across her lap, one hand placed lightly over the clasp as if steadying something alive. Inside it, the Ensign signature page remained clean, untouched, and more powerful in its absence than it would have been on the boardroom table. The bent visitor badge sat in the outer pocket, its corner still folded, carrying the shape of 3 hours no apology could press flat. Through the rear window, the tower grew smaller by degrees, but Naomi did not turn to watch it disappear. She looked forward, past the traffic, past the city buses exhaling at the curb, past the evening office workers crossing the avenue with bags, phones, coffee cups, and tired faces. The world continued with ordinary motion, and that steadied her. Power did not always look like a dramatic exit. Sometimes it looked like refusing to sign until respect became part of the terms. High above the lobby, the 42nd floor boardroom remained lit under cold white fixtures. The long table still held printed packets, untouched water glasses, a speakerphone, a row of leather chairs, and one empty seat marked for the strategic client. Richard Caldwell stood near the window with his hands at his sides, no longer performing authority for anyone. His reflection floated over the city glass, smaller than the skyline behind him. Victor Lane gathered the contract pages into a folder, careful not to disturb the assigned space where Naomi's name should have completed the deal. Helen Whitfield stood at the head of the table, reading the preservation notice from Maya Brooks aloud in a voice that left no room for softening the record. Lobby logs. Calendar entries. Security footage. Visitor badge data. Email chains. Internal messages. Executive communications. All of it would remain. All of it would tell the same story. The client had arrived on time. The company had made her wait. The chief executive officer had judged before he verified. The money did not leave because it was offended, but because leadership had revealed risk. Downstairs, Samuel Price closed the security log after entering his final note. He looked toward the glass doors where Naomi had walked out, and then placed the pen beside the book with quiet care. Emily Hart sent the last file to legal, then sat back from the reception desk, hands folded, face pale but clearer than before. She had learned that silence protects power until one honest record breaks it. Outside, the sedan stopped at a red light. Naomi opened her phone and saw the confirmation from Maya. Formal pause notice delivered. She read it once, then locked the screen. Her face in the dark window looked calm, not untouched, not softened, but whole. She thought of the melted ice water, the bent badge, the way Samuel had said respect should not require a contract, and the way Richard had finally apologized only after the numbers made humility unavoidable. She did not hate him. Hatred would have kept him in the car with her. Instead, she let the building recede behind traffic and glass. The driver asked, "Airport or office, Ms. Whitaker?" Naomi looked at the portfolio, then at the city ahead. "Office," she said. "We have other partners to review." The light turned green. The sedan moved forward. In the tower behind her, the strategic client chair remained empty, the contract remained unsigned, and Richard remained standing before a window that reflected only what he had failed to see. Naomi rested her hand on the portfolio and closed her eyes for one quiet breath. The loudest answer she could give was not anger, not revenge, not a speech in the lobby. It was the absence of her signature, carried calmly into the evening.